Hello, everyone. So today we are looking at the Raven summary. You already analyzed the poem. You went through stanza by stanza and defined words that you didn't know, and phrases you didn't know, and terms you didn't know. And then you used that to summarize the poem stanza by stanza, working with a partner. And now we are going to go over it together. So, looking at stanza one, we already went over this together, but I'm going to refresh your mind again. It was a dreary midnight. The narrator was sitting in his room reading old stories, nodding off to sleep. Suddenly, he heard a tapping at his door. He was a little scared and told himself it was only just a visitor tapping at his door. The narrator is thinking back to this day, so he remembers it was a depressing, cold December night. So notice he says, distinctly, I remember. And then if we go back to stanza one, he says it was once upon a midnight dreary. So we're looking back at a day that happened in the past. There was a fire burning in the fireplace, and the dying embers of the fire were casting ghost like shadows on the floor. The narrator was wishing for the next day because he was grieving his lost love, Lenore. He calls her beautiful and says she's now with the angels, but here on earth she's nameless because she's dead. So, whom the angels name Lenore, the angels call her by name because they are with her in heaven. Stanza 3. The purple curtains in his room were rustling, causing him to get even more spooked out. His heart was beating super quickly, and he tried to calm himself down by repeating, It's just a late night visitor at my door. So, again, this guy is just like nodding off to sleep. He's just chilling in his chair. He's reading a book. He's trying to forget his his grieving and his sorrow for Lenore because she died and he's sad, but it's all in vain. He's still really upset about his dead lover, which obviously. And he gets really spooked out because, well, one, it's late, it's like midnight, and I get scared at night. So it's midnight, and then someone taps at his door. Someone is knocking at his door at midnight. That would freak me out in the daylight. So it's dark and someone's tapping at his door, and the curtains are rustling. So the breeze in the room, causing the curtains to rustle a little bit, that freaks him out. And he is just sitting there, like heart beating fast. And he's just trying to tell himself, it's okay, it's just a visitor at the door. So then he's able to muster up the courage and talk to the visitor. So, like, he's still sitting in his chair and he's just like yelling at the door. He's a little embarrassed it took him so long to answer. So he tells the visitor he's sorry he took a while to answer and that he was napping while they knocked. So he's like, um, truly, your forgiveness I implore. I'm sorry. I was sleeping and you didn't knock very loud. So that's why it took me a while, but that's not actually what happened. Actually, what happened is he was just being scared. So finally, he goes up to the door, he opens it, and there is no one there. It's just darkness. So he is just standing there staring, looking out at the darkness for a while. He is like really scared. He's making himself even more afraid. And he's kind of hoping that that visitor was the ghost of Lenore because he whispers, Lenore? Like a question, like, is it you? But all he hears back is his echo, and that's it. So then our narrator, he goes back into the chamber. He is even more afraid, as I would be. I'm just trying to put myself in this situation. I would be like on the floor, terrified at this point. So he is like really frightened at this point, and he hears the tapping again, and it's louder this time. So then he thinks it must be something at my window. So then he decides to go to the window, see what it is. He's still really scared. And so he tries reassuring himself by telling him it is just the wind at the window, like it's fine. So he flings open the window, as you can tell in this picture here, and a majestic raven steps inside the room. So he says that the raven didn't even acknowledge him. He just flew to the chamber door and perched on a statue of Pallas above it. So a bust is a statue. And then, as you guys looked up, Pallas is the Greek goddess of wisdom, or in other terms, she's also known as Athena. So that's who Pallas is. And there's a picture there of what that would look like, a bust of Pallas. So then the narrator tells us that the raven was distracting him from his sadness. He was beguiling his sad fancy into smiling. So he's kind of distracting him, like he likes it. He thinks that it's funny that the raven is so stern and serious looking. So he talks to the raven like he's a noble person. And he refers to the way that a cowardly knight would sometimes have his head shaven to humiliate him. He's just throwing in some random fancy stuff here. Plutonian, when it talks about the Knights Plutonian shore, it refers to the Roman god Pluto who rules the underworld. So he asks the raven then what his name is. That's really all he wants to know. Like, what's your name? And the raven says, Nevermore. So then the narrator is amazed that the raven spoke so clearly and to say like a human word, but he doesn't understand how Nevermore answers his question about his name. And then he points out that no one before him has ever had a bird or even an animal, bird or beast, named Nevermore sitting on a statue in his room, which, like, I guess you can't argue with that. The narrator tells us that the only thing the raven ever said was Nevermore. Only thing it ever says. And so now he's just trying to come up with a reason why. Oh, wait, sorry. I'm skipping stanzas here. Not yet. So before that, the narrator then starts to pity himself by saying that other friends have left him before. Other friends have flown before. So he's had friends in the past who have left him before. And he says, the raven's no different. I'm not going to get my hopes up. I'm not going to think I have a friend here. He said that the raven would leave the next day just as his hopes had left before. So he's like really self-pitying himself. And then the raven replied, Nevermore. So it's kind of like a positive reply to this. Like the guy's like, he's going to leave me. And the raven said, no, I'm never leaving. So then the narrator was startled by the raven's reply, obviously, because Nevermore could be an actual response to what he said. And this is where he's trying to figure out why this bird is only saying Nevermore. So he tries calming himself down because he's kind of like freaked out at this point, and he's like, well, maybe the bird had a really depressed former owner whose life was so miserable that the only thing the owner ever said was Nevermore. And that's why it's the only word the raven knew, because it's the only word that it picked up on and knew how to say. So then for some reason, the narrator was still fascinated by the bird. So he pulls up a chair and sits in front of it. And he sinks into the chair and tries to think what this scary, ancient-looking bird means with saying Nevermore. Notice how the chair he's sitting in is described. It is velvet. The curtains were described as being purple. So we see a lot of references to luxury or to wealth in here. We also see a lot of references to spookiness and scariness and bleakness. So then he sits and he thinks in silence, and the bird and him are just like staring each other down. He imagined the fiery eyes of the raven burning through the core of his chest. Does a raven actually have fiery eyes? No. But this is what he's imagining because he's just sitting there staring at the bird. So then he gets distracted and he starts focusing on that velvet lining of the chair, and he thinks about how Lenore will never sit on the chair again because she's dead. She shall press nevermore. Kind of depressing. So this is where it gets a little bit weird, so stay with me. So in his grief, remember he is grieving, he's up late. He imagines the air filling with perfume from an invisible censer. So a censer is like a globe that holds burning incense. So he suddenly feels like he smells this incense now. And he imagines angels are the ones swinging this censer around, the ones like making the air full of perfume. And he even hears their footsteps on the carpet, whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. So then he calls himself a wretch. He's yelling at himself. He told himself that this imaginary perfume thickening the air was sent from God to help him forget Lenore. He compared this perfume to Nepenthe, which you look this one up too, is a mythological drink that was supposed to comfort grieving people. So then he tells himself to drink this potion and forget Lenore. Like his grief is so heavy that he would just rather forget Lenore than keep feeling this grief that he feels. So then the raven cuts him off by saying nevermore. This works up the narrator. The narrator starts yelling at the bird, calling him a prophet and a thing of evil. He backed off, though, on that evil thing. And he's moving back and forth between assuming that the raven has come straight from Satan, the tempter, or if it has just been blown in by a storm at random. So the narrator then tells us the bird was all alone, but seems unshaken, desolate, yet all undaunted. And then he asks the bird a question that's like a bookwormish question, stereotypical question, I guess, is there balm in Gilead? Which means basically like, is there hope in my future? Is there a possibility of comfort, of peace? And the raven says, nevermore. So the narrator is either
Something went wrong. Please try again.
Thanks, Siri. The narrator is either slow to catch on, or he's really enjoying this interaction he's having with the bird, this like torture that the bird is inflicting on him. So he asks in the name of God if he will one day get to embrace his beloved Lenore again in the distant Aden or heaven. And the bird says, nevermore. And the narrator completely loses it. He jumps up to tell the bird to go away. He directs it to get back to the storm and the evil night it came from. He told it not to leave any trace, not even a feather, and to make its lies or to take its lies elsewhere and leave him to his loneliness. Then he tells the raven, get off the statue, take his beak out of his heart, and basically tells him to go to hell. To which the raven said, nevermore. He is here to stay. So, last stanza, the poem suddenly switches to present tense, and we realize that this isn't just a story from the past. Remember, it starts off by saying, once upon a midnight dreary, and he says, I remember it was a bleak December. But this story is actually still happening. The raven is still there. It says, and the raven never flitting still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. He has turned into kind of a statue himself. And he's not dead. Okay. I know it seems like that they're saying that his soul, from out the shadow that lies floating on the floor, the shadow has kind of trapped the speaker and imprisoned his soul, because it's the raven brought him to such derision, to such craziness. I'm not sure the right word to use here. I mean, he's kind of descended, like you see what I wrote here, he's kind of descended into his own personal hell. Like he drove himself crazy with this raven. So it starts out about a talking raven on a dark night, and then it ends up him having this such severe conflict within his mind, and now he is still stuck in this loop. He's descended into his own personal hell, and he's stuck there with the raven. So that is a summary of the raven. And what I want you to do is, if you did not get done with your summary, I want you to look at this Edpuzzle, go through it, and I want you to write what I have, summarize what I have on your summary. And if you got some of the stanzas wrong or you're missing something from them, make sure you add what I have in here to it. If you are close, like you have everything is just worded differently, or you summarized it even more than what I have, then that's fine. But if there's something that you need to fix on your summary, go back in and fix that, so that you have the right thing. So that's all. The raven, nevermore.